Okay, so to get us started, I want to say hi, welcome. My name is Rachel Kaplan. I am serving two different roles here today. I am a contract employee with April, running their social media and their communications. And I also am a contractor with Kelly's Kitchen, and I do some of their program management. So I'm going to be here kind of helping make sure things run smoothly from the April side and also helping to do some presenting on the Kelly's Kitchen side. So I just want to thank you so much for joining April and Kelly's Kitchen for the second of our 4 webinars about the intersection of food justice and disability justice. Today, we're going to talk about best practices when it comes to disability and nutrition. So just some quick housekeeping items that I want to let you know about. We do have 2 ASL interpreters. They'll be switching out, but they will always make sure to pin themselves when they are the ones that are interpreting for the group. So you'll be able to see them the whole time. We have closed captioner. So we have closed captioning, and you can enable that by looking at the toolbar that is usually at the bottom of your screen and clicking on the captioning button, and it'll show the closed captions on the screen. If you need to change the view that you're looking at, there is a button. It's a rectangle with 3 dots on top, and it says view next to it sometimes, and that's where you can change the view. So you can see either who is speaking, or you can use the gallery view, which will show you everybody that's currently pinned. And then if you have a question, you can use the raise your hand feature. You can write something down in the chat and we'll get to it. Eva, who is with Kelly's Kitchen, is going to be manning our chat today. And so if you have any questions, she'll be happy to make sure that we notice them and they get answered. And then you're also welcome to unmute yourself to ask a question. We're going to aim to save 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. One of our guest speakers today is a nutritionist, and that was something that people who attended our first course were very interested in. They had some questions from a nutrition perspective. And so we wanted to make sure that we brought a nutritionist in this time. And so if you have questions, you'll be able to ask those to her. Just as a really quick reminder, she is here as a professional who's answering questions about nutrition in general. She's not here to give personal medical advice. So just keep that in mind, that she's not giving any personal medical advice today to anybody. Okay, so with that, I am going to get started. So, how do I go? There we go. Okay, so on your screen, you are going to see 3 photos. There is the photo on the left is a photo of Kelly Timmons, who's the founder of Kelly's Kitchen. In the middle, there's a photo of Donna Valente, who is one of our speakers. And then on the far right, there is a picture of Susannah Scaroni, who is another one of our speakers. So I've already introduced myself. Kelly, do you really quickly want to just say hi since you're on here for those who might not have been with us the first course?
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you everyone for joining us today for the second of our 4-course series on the intersection of food justice and disability justice. If you were along for the ride on the first time, or if you've seen the recording, you'll know that we touched on a lot of definitions. What is food justice? What does it mean? What are the different parts? And now this time we are going to bring all that in and show how disability maybe changes that a little bit. So we have 2 professionals that are going to tell you some wonderful information about nutrition, how it affects your bodies, and different types of bodies. Some folks are gluten-free. Some people, have other dietary restrictions that need to be monitored. So I just cannot wait to hear from these 2 ladies. Been looking forward to this. I just want to thank you for being here and enjoy. We look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. So I'm going to let Donna Valente say hi really quick and give a visual description of herself. Donna?
Did I just mute myself? Hi, my name is Donna Valente. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm a white woman in my early 60s. I have medium curly or wavy hair with a little gray. I have wire rim glasses and I'm wearing a tie-dye fresh off the line. Nice to be with y'all.
Awesome. Thank you, Donna. And Donna learned to cook and bake throughout her life side by side with incredibly talented home cooks. She specializes in baking and cooking healthy, beautiful, delicious dairy-free meals and treats, and she loves to share her passions with others. Her name or maybe her photo might sound familiar if you follow Kelly's Kitchen on social media. She has created multiple different recipes that we've shared on our social media and that we have on our blog section of the website, which you are welcome to check out after this. And then, Susannah, do you want to introduce yourself really quick and give a visual description?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. My name is Susannah Scaroni. I am a white, blonde-haired woman and I am wearing a black jacket over a gray shirt. And like Donna, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you guys. And I'm excited to talk to you about nutrition.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Susannah. Susannah is a 3-time Paralympic wheelchair racer who is also a registered dietitian. So she combines her passion for nutrition with her experience as a para-athlete to help promote healthy eating and lifestyle choices for a variety of individuals. She has a deep desire to assist people with disabilities in particular, be able to gain the knowledge and skills that will empower them to achieve their health goals. So we are excited to have both of them. And as a quick visual description for myself, I don't think I did that. Again, my name is Rachel Kaplan. I am a white woman in her mid-30s. I have long brown hair that goes past my shoulders. I'm wearing a dark green blazer. I have glasses, and I'm wearing pink headphones. So with that, we will keep going. So for anyone who's joining us for the first time, on the screen is a screenshot of the homepage of the Kelly's Kitchen website. So it's in a blue and orange color scheme, and it states what our mission is. So Kelly's Kitchen is a food justice organization that places emphasis on the intersection of food justice, social justice, racial justice, and disability justice. And our mission is to promote healthy nutrition in the whole community with a focus on providing education on ways to access healthy foods, explore employment opportunities and possibilities in the food and beverage industry, ensure food security, and learn healthy preparation techniques. So really our objectives for today are to understand best practices for healthy eating, kind of talk about how disability can change the norms and expectations surrounding those terms like health and nutrition. And then kind of figuring out what nutrition best practices there can be for people with disabilities. And so I'm excited that you're also going to learn about some cooking tips for making dairy-free items. So on the screen, there is an infographic. And I think before we get into some of the content, it would be good to have a basis for why this is important and why there is such an overlap when it comes to food insecurity and disability. So on this infographic on the left-hand side, there are a couple different colors with statistics highlighted. There's an orange outline of the United States map. And in that map, there's text that says 33 million Americans have food allergies. So we know that inequity is a compounding factor when it comes to food security. And food allergies and food insecurity together are of special concern when it comes to nutrition, health, and safety of all community members. Two more statistics that are on this infographic say that 1 in 10 adults have a food allergy, and 1 in 13 adults have a food allergy. So I want you to kind of reframe this information in your mind by thinking about somebody who can't eat certain foods and has to be worried about cross-contamination, and think about how many food resources that impacts for that particular person. So for example, let's think of peanut allergies, because that's a very common allergy, and that can range from anywhere from you can have an allergic reaction if you eat it, to you can have an allergic reaction if it's in the same room as you. So for somebody that has a peanut allergy, if they're worried about peanuts or peanut butter being in the space, or they're worried about cross-contamination, they may not be able to utilize a food resource that has peanuts or peanut butter in the vicinity. So when you think about somebody who needs to utilize a local food resource, but maybe they can't because of that fear of an anaphylactic shock or a really serious allergic reaction, then that changes what access really looks like for them. Something that I think is really interesting is that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention reports that the prevalence of food allergies in children has increased by 50% between 1997 and 2011. So that means that there are more, young people that are going to grow up to be adults for their whole lifespan that are going to have allergies that impact and dictate where they can go and what foods they can eat. And that's something to be mindful of when we're thinking about the resources that are available to them with food. And between 1997 and 2008, the prevalence of peanut or tree allergies appears to have more than tripled in United States children. So when we're giving that example of peanut butter and an allergy, that's a very real concern for a lot of people who might need access to foods in their community. So I want to talk about another disability that can be impacted by food, and that is autism and food selectivity. So there have been a lot of studies that document that people with autism engage in food selectivity. And that just means that they only eat certain foods or textures, or that there are certain things that they won't eat. Food selectivity, you're being selective about what you are willing to eat and how much of it. And so this really means that in a society that defines health and eating habits and childhood milestone markers in a way that that really places focus on eating habits. So there are mile markers for when a baby switches from milk or formula to solid foods. There are milestones about when new foods are starting to be introduced and if kids are open to those new foods. And all of these milestones are based on the assumption that nobody has a disability. So when we are talking about a child with autism that does have a disability that impacts the foods that they'll eat, it makes it even more complicated, because then not only are they only eating certain foods, and that can be difficult for getting all of the nutrients that a young person needs, but it also means that now all of a sudden they're not hitting benchmarks that they should be. And that can feel really terrible and really overwhelming to a parent. That can feel like for that young person that they're disappointing the people around them, and that already creates this negative association with food. So children with autism, they consume less fruit, dairy products, vegetables, proteins, and starch than children without a diagnosis. And in a study where there was a control group, so there was a control group of children aged 3 to 5 that had autism and a group that did not. And the results of the study showed that children with autism preferred foods of a certain consistency. They were choosier about their foods. They were more reluctant to try new foods, and they were much more restricted in the variety of foods that they preferred and that they would eat. And those are things that we know just conversationally in working in the community with people with disabilities, having loved ones, being a person with autism. We know this information, but the studies are showing that to kind of back up what we in the disability community already know. And the study, every study and statistic that I have, I will send you a resource list. So you'll have all of this information too. The study that this is referring to, I'm going to read this to you so you don't have to worry about reading the slide. But this quote is directly from the study. And so as I read it, what I would like is for you to be able to, in the chat, write down when you hear language that is concerning or stigmatizing for somebody with a disability. Okay, and I do see a comment in the chat, preferred language. We are autistic, not with autism. I can use that language. I tend to default to person first unless I know what the preference is. I am fine with saying autistic people if that's the preference. I definitely want to be respectful. So I'm going to read this quote. Whenever you hear something concerning that is negative towards autistic people and their eating habits, please go ahead and put it in the chat. So autism spectrum disorders, ASD, are characterized by core symptoms, social communication, and restricted and repetitive patterns, behaviors, and related comorbidities, including sensory anomalies, feeding issues, and challenging behaviors. Children with ASD experience significantly more feeding problems than their peers. In fact, parents and clinicians have to manage daily the burden of various dysfunctional behaviors of children at mealtimes, food refusal, limited variety of food, single food intake, or liquid diet. These dysfunctional behaviors at mealtime depend on different factors that are either medical, sensorial, or behavioral. Consequently, a correct assessment is necessary in order to program an effective clinical intervention. The aim of this study is to provide clinicians with a guideline regarding food selectivity concerning possible explanations of the phenomenon, along with a direct, indirect assessment gathering detailed and useful information about target feeding behaviors. And I'll stop there. But let's look. Eva, do you want to read some of the things that are in the chat that people have kind of heard as we went through this?
Yes, of course. I'm seeing a lot of burden, dysfunctional behaviors, correct assessment, phenomenon, sensory anomalies. Those seem to be the common ones.
Okay. Yeah. Comorbidities, dysfunction. I see those. Burden. Yeah. Issues. Yeah. So there is some language in here that already would make somebody who is autistic or on the spectrum feel like they're a problem or a burden to their parents, that they're not eating the way that they quote unquote should. And that's an issue for everybody around them. Nowhere in this, this abstract of a research study, which was published in 2023, by the way. So this is not old language. This is only a year ago, and this is still the mentality towards kids who are autistic. And none of it looks at it from their perspective of how might this be difficult for them? How can they be empowered to make sure that they're eating and getting the nutrients that they need? It's all about how they have challenging behaviors. They're an anomaly. They have feeding issues. They have feeding problems. It's very negative. So I think that that's something that we have to look at. Is that's great that there's research and people know that kids with autism have a different dietary preference, but the way that we're talking about it is still very damaging. And it doesn't really help that person address nutrition and kind of how they want to move forward with making healthy food choices. So in terms of disordered eating and eating disorders, 9% of the US population have an eating disorder or will have an eating disorder in their lifetime. And the overall lifetime prevalence of eating disorders is estimated to be 8.6% among females and 4.07, so about 4.1% among males. So there's already, a higher prevalence of eating disorders in the United States. And that is just taking into account the US population as a whole. And we know that a lot of eating disorders, especially newer ones that have just been added into the DSM, that not everybody is getting diagnosed. So there are people who have disordered eating patterns that haven't been diagnosed with those. And so I would suspect that those numbers are higher than what's listed. So when we start looking at the intersection of food insecurity and eating disorder, we see that food insecurity is associated with over 1.5 times higher odds of binge eating disorder, and 1.3 times higher odds of binge eating symptoms in early adolescence. So if somebody is food insecure, they're binge eating more than somebody who's not worried about where their next meal is coming from. And a recent study found that the odds of adults having binge eating, if they experienced food insecurity, are over 1.5 times the odds of adults having binge eating if they have food security. So these statistics are showing us that if people don't know where their food is coming from or if they will have a next meal, they are overeating to try and avoid probably those feelings of hunger. And that worry that they might not eat for a while. And so we have to be able to look at people's circumstances to understand what motivates the way that they eat. So I really quickly want to talk to you about the different eating guidelines that have been out there. So in 1997, the food pyramid, 1992, the food pyramid was released. And I'm sure that a lot of you remember the food pyramid. That's what I grew up learning for nutrition. It gives really detailed recommendations for daily servings of each food group. And it starts on the bottom with the foods you should have the most of. And it kind of works its way up to the foods that you should eat or use more sparingly. So the bottom of the food pyramid is bread, cereal, rice, and pasta. The next group up is fruits and vegetables, and they kind of share that layer on the pyramid. The next one up, they share its milk, yogurt, and cheese group, and then your meat, poultry, fish, eggs, nuts, beans, so your proteins, share the next level. And then the very tippy top of the pyramid is your fats, oils, and sweets. So again, in 1992, this is what people were using when talking about what a healthy diet looks like, what a healthy eating plan looks like. In 2011, it switched to the MyPlate system. And so MyPlate is a visual representation of a plate, a circular plate, and it's split into 4 categories that are not even. So it's not an even 4-way split. We have fruits on the top left, that's in red. Next to it on the top right are grains, which are in orange. The bottom left is vegetables, which is a bigger chunk. And then the bottom right is protein, and that's in purple. And so the idea of MyPlate is that instead of focusing on how many servings you should be having a day, let's focus on making sure that you have a balance of different types of foods on your plate. And then there is a blue circle off to the side of the plate that says dairy. So my plate is simpler and it's easier to understand, and it encourages, according to the USDA, it encourages Americans to fill half their plate with fruits and vegetables. So some of the concerns around this is that it is not detailed enough for somebody who needs concrete information, right? It's just a picture that kind of shows you that for an average meal, you should probably have more vegetables than protein, but it doesn't really tell you what protein is, right? So the issue is that for somebody who, let me go to a bigger picture. There we go. So for somebody who they don't understand what protein is. Protein it's not accurate to call a food a protein, right? There's no food group called protein because it's a nutrient and not a food. So when you say protein, a lot of people are gonna automatically think of meats. But protein is also found in vegetables, grains, dairy, and beans. So really, to be more accurate, if what they meant was protein, they could have put meat or meat alternative, right? And that would help somebody who doesn't eat meat and associates protein with meat. This also shows you various food groups that you need in your diet, but it doesn't necessarily reflect all of your meals. So for example, for breakfast, you're not going to hit all of these categories for breakfast, right? And so you may think, if I don't hit all of these categories, then I'm not eating a well-balanced meal. And that's not necessarily the case. You also don't really learn exactly what to eat just by looking at what is shown on the image. So, for example, when you're looking at the plate, is it clear that whole grains are the goal, that you should be having more whole grains than other foods? Not necessarily. You can tell that it's a bigger chunk, but you don't necessarily know what amount bigger that means. So it's just a little bit confusing. And my plate doesn't teach people how to lose or control their weight. So with a big enough plate or a big enough glass, you could be following this icon exactly, but you're also eating too many calories because of the size of the plate that you're following. So this is a great start, but it is not the only tool that we should be using when we're thinking about what a well-rounded meal looks like and what types of foods we should be aiming for. This graphic also doesn't mention sweets, fats, or alcohol, and that doesn't mean that people don't consume them. It just isn't on this image. And usually there's this dieting mentality that either food is good or it's bad, right? And so if it's not on here, the default is that those things are bad. And really, it's just about moderation. You even want to eat healthy foods in moderation. And this is something that I'm sure that Susannah will go into a little bit more. So I'm going to pull back on this conversation. But there are definitely drawbacks to this model. Think about the different individuals that you know or that you work with, that this would either be not concrete enough for them or it would be very confusing. And that could be based on their disability, based on their age, just based on their knowledge of nutrition. It's not disability specific. So the last thing I want to touch on before I hand it over is that the USDA is currently updating their guidelines. So right now we are in the 2020 to 2025 dietary guidelines for Americans. In 2023, in January of last year, 20 nationally recognized nutrition and public health experts were chosen to serve on a dietary guideline advisory committee to help figure out what the guidelines are going to be for the next 5 years. So from 2025 to 2030. And what I think is important to note, and again, I'll send you this resource so you can look at all of the experts that are on this committee, is that based on the bios that they have on the website, none of them have a self-acknowledged disability. It doesn't mean they don't have a disability, they just didn't state that they had one. And there are only 2 people on this committee who address disability specifically in their focus. And so I want to show you who those are. So this slide has a picture of Andrea Darlene. I could be mispronouncing that. She's a white woman with long dark hair. She recently expanded her research to include disability-related disparities in nutrition and reproductive health. So again, she's including disability population in her discussions about diet and guidelines and nutrition, but it's very specific to reproductive health. And then a photo on the right is Samira Talawakar. And the overall goal of her research is to better understand the role of dietary patterns and other lifestyle predictors on age-related changes in the physical function among older adults, which includes frailty, mobile limitations, and disability. And that's a quote taken directly from her bio. So again, she's placing some focus on disability, but it's only on disability related to aging. So we're again not talking about people who are born with their disability or who get their disability at a younger age, or who don't have any physical limitations or functions to their day-to-day life. So I think that's important to note, that the people who are at the table helping to make the next 5 years of guidelines aren't necessarily representative of the disability population. And that's a perspective that is missing. And Kelly, I didn't know if you had anything that you wanted to add to this part.
Yes, the only part that I wanted to add is that while these 2 women, yes, are part of the 20, there are many others of us in their ears, and we've been a part of some of the meetings that they've allowed us to attend, to focus, to let these folks know they need to focus on people with disabilities. I don't hold out a lot of hope that this 25 is going to be the year where it really changes, but in 2030, we're going to keep on them, and hopefully that will make a bigger impact. So they are aware. The whole team is trying, is working with us. And so we are having some success, but not as much as we would like.
Yeah. Thank you, Kelly. So just some information to think about. And I want to go ahead at this point and turn it over to Donna. On the screen, there are screenshots of different recipes that Donna has cooked that we've posted on our social media. And again, those recipes can be found on our website. And with that, Donna, I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Okay. So hi, everybody. I am really thrilled to be here, and I real quick wanted to tell you why I started going dairy-free, and it was because I actually, looking back, had disordered eating myself, and I got really, really sick a couple of years ago, and ended up in the hospital. I couldn't eat for a week, and then when I could finally eat, what I wanted, what I craved was like fruit and cottage cheese. And anyway, when I got out, I started eating again. And I realized every time I had cheese or ate, my stomach hurt. And so I thought I would just do an elimination diet. I eliminated eating cheese and dairy cheese and milk and, dairy stuff. And I started feeling better. So I kept on that path, and I'm still on it today. And I feel so much better when I don't consume dairy. And in those almost 3 years, I've found that there are a lot more products coming on the market. So there's some cheeses that are being developed that taste a little better. But one thing I will say is that you can't do a substitution for one item, and it's cheese. Fake cheese just doesn't. I haven't found one that tastes like real cheese. So sorry about that. There's some things you can make that are great, and others not so much. So the biggest thing that I look for first, being dairy free, is I got to know the ingredients of everything that I come in contact with. So I always read labels, and every packaged food item has to list the ingredients, and it has to list allergens. It has to call them out, either bold or in italics, or in some other way where you notice them apart from the ingredients, so that you can avoid foods that you don't want to eat. So looking at ingredients labels is a big part of my life. And one of the things that I found is if I'm trying to do things a little quicker, I'll look for certain things like a kosher label. And one of the symbols, I'm going to hold up this Country Crock plant butter, unsalted, that I use a lot. It's got a little circle with a U in it, and that means that it's kosher overseers, and it's kosher, and usually that's dairy. You look on the back. I'm turning the back around to the ingredients list, and it says it does not. There's no dairy listed or any dairy products, and then at the end it says contains soy. So if you have a soy allergy, that's a really tough one, and that's a whole nother issue. A lot of dairy substitute things have soy in them, including tofu. I'm holding up now a organic silken tofu package, and there's a little Circle K on there also as well. And so just looking at the ingredients, there's no dairy, and it says it contains soy. So and dairy, a lot of people seem to be confused. When I say dairy, I'm talking about milk products, like any from any animal. But in the dairy section, you'll find eggs and all the other stuff. But I'm talking about dairy, milk, cheese, cream, all that really good stuff. So I'm going to give you a couple baking and cooking tips. One of the big ones for me for baking was the plant butter, like I showed you. If you're going to make something like cookies, a lot of times it says soften the butter. Don't do that with this kind of plant butter, because it melts a lot quicker than regular butter, and the cookies will come out flat, and it's just don't do it. It's not a good thing. Let's see. You can make some really good buttercream frosting using this plant butter, about 1.5 cups of plant butter, and I use about a 1/2 cup of coconut oil, which I don't have in front of me. But when I beat the butter and a bag of confectioner's sugar, it's about, I don't have the grams that it is, but a medium-sized bag of confectioner's sugar, a little bit of vanilla. The coconut oil will help stabilize the plant butter, and the buttercream frosting will turn out a lot better. And if you want to make it chocolate, you can throw in about 1/4 cup of cocoa and delicious chocolate frosting. Okay, you can make dairy-free buttermilk, and you can make it with dairy as well, but I've never bought dairy. I've never bought buttermilk before. I've never tried it, but a lot of recipes had it, so I thought I would try this. All you have to do is take a liquid measuring cup that's about 1 cup. You pour in about 1 tablespoon of either vinegar or lemon juice, and then you fill the rest with the milk of your choice, and up till it comes up to the 1 cup mark. Stir it gently and let it sit for about 5 minutes, and then before adding it to your recipe. And that buttermilk imparts a lovely, moist, delicious crumb to your biscuits or whatever you're making. It's really good. Okay, another tip that is really delicious is nutritional yeast, and it's a really good substitute for a cheesy flavor. And when you're trying to create a sauce or just add some flavor, it's really good. And I've seen on Instagram, there's one called like like Nushi, or they make it sound like it's this remarkable invention, and you can get it at your supermarket and it's not expensive. And let's okay, another thing that I found that it works really well, broths are great substitutes for milk when you're doing like an egg wash, if you're having cutlets. So instead of using milk and an egg, I use mushroom broth or vegetable broth, and it really, the flavor is really, really good. Okay, so, oh gosh. Sorry, oh no, sorry, I had a call come in on my phone from my husband. Okay, so I wanted to give you a couple of eating out tips because you can control pretty much what you eat when you're in your own house, but when you're out and about, it's kind of like the Wild West. So you really have to be an advocate. And I know that that's the way it is for any kind of person that deals with a food allergy. And I've learned that you got to ask, otherwise you might find out that you're going to you'll have dairy show up in a product that it's not listed in a restaurant item. It might be vegetarian items, and there might be cheese in there. Cheese is everywhere. Cheese is on salads. Cheese is in sauces. Cheese is in breadcrumbs. So if you think you're going to get like a dairy-free cutlet with your eggplant, check, because they might have Parmesan cheese in there. Breadcrumbs. Up until very recently, I had to make my own breadcrumbs with a grater and bread that I know was dairy free, and grate it because every single brand on the shelf had dairy in it. Weird, right? So the soda bread that I had with my St. Patrick's Day dinner had, I realized after, like, what did I eat that's bothering my stomach? I looked at the label, there's dairy, and it was my own fault. But anyway, you just want to beware and ask questions. Even if you ask for your salad with no cheese, you might end up with cheese in it anyway. Sometimes they, at diners, they might butter the bread before, they definitely butter the toast. So make sure you tell them dry toast, and that's, even though that sounds horrible. Or do you have an alternative? You can ask for olive oil when you're at a restaurant, but always ask. And just beware of sauces and and it can be in the weirdest things, dairy. So just ask. That's the biggest thing. There's some things that I would not recommend baking. One of them is 7-layer cookies, which are delicious. I've tried them several times, and I don't know if it's the plant butter or the sweetened condensed milk substitute that I've used, but they just don't turn out the same. So don't be afraid to try. That's another thing. Don't be afraid to try and speak up for yourself. Okay, that's it. I'm out. Bon appetit.
Awesome. Those are great tips, Donna. Thank you so much. And we've had a couple of good comments in the chat about if you have allergies that you have to look for. So Andy said, I have a nut allergy and my partner has a dairy allergy. So I have to read labels a lot. But because of my reading disability, this was a huge barrier for me. Eventually, I got a pair of phone-conducive headphones and Google Lens, which allowed me to listen to my ingredients in the grocery store.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. Somebody says that they use the Fig app, Food is Good, for identifying the ingredients in different foods. And there's a browser version if you don't use your phone for shopping. So we've got some really good things going on in the chat. And thank you for sharing that, Donna. Everybody keep sharing whatever you would like in the chat while we keep going. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Susannah. And Susannah, just let me know when you want me to switch to the next.
Okay, thank you so much. Hi everyone. As I said, I'm Susannah Scaroni. I just want to thank Rachel and Donna both. I think you guys both mentioned some really important things that, as a dietitian, I think are so important. A lot of those, getting more familiar with reading nutrition labels, to empower yourself to know what ingredients are in foods. That's such a helpful skill. And getting familiar with what symbols like the kosher symbol actually mean. All of those things, have, become legislature to be on products, but we still have to help our clients and ourselves be knowledgeable about what ingredients mean dairy or what kosher means. Like all of these things can help us as consumers and as professionals, our clients make informed choices. And so just wanted to say thank you guys. I'm going to talk about some best practices that as a dietitian and as a person with a disability and as a consumer, I think are important for, helping, again, empower people to make lifestyle choices to meet their own health goals. And I'm a registered dietitian. I'm also a 3-time Paralympic wheelchair racer. And I fortunate to train with EBA at the University of Illinois, which is where I earned my undergraduate and graduate degrees. And so you can head to the next slide if you don't mind. I really like this quote by Hippocrates. So it's very old, but I think very relevant. And it is, if we could give every individual the right amount of nourishment and exercise, not too little and not too much, we would have found the safest way to health. And on the next slide, which you can go there now, I really like this quote for a few reasons. First of all, I think it's really important that we notice in the individual with nutrition, as with every health field. I think we really recognize that we need to take individualized approaches, especially in nutrition and especially in working with people with disabilities. I also really like this holistic approach of understanding food as nourishment. Like Rachel really nicely said, there's protein on the plate, but protein's a nutrient. And what are nutrients and how do they work in our bodies? In addition to exercise, which I would probably change to physical activity if I were Hippocrates writing this today. But I think it's really important when we're working with people and for ourselves to understand nutrition as a very holistic, systematic approach to our health. And then health. I think we can't get away from health when we're talking about nutrition. It is a very important part of why we eat what we eat. And something I think we don't want to forget, but really, I think having an individualized approach, a holistic approach, and being really knowledgeable about the health impacts can help empower all of us and the people we work with to make their own goals. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So I'm just going to kind of go in, from my experience, what those 3 kind of categories have meant to me. And I think some of the best practices when we're thinking about how to individualize our approach to nutrition and to working with people with disabilities who with their nutrition are, asking open-ended questions. I really enjoyed when Rachel earlier talked about the definitions of autism and what those kind of phrases and words can sometimes unintentionally create biases. And I think as professionals and as people, open-ended questions allow us to empower our clients to know, what are your goals? Is there anything in your life that you wish was different? Allowing people to talk to us about what their experiences are. Listening skills are key to avoid making assumptions. And this is really important when we're understanding someone's nutrition, knowledge, and what their goals are. People with disabilities are experts in their lived experience. As it's been, I think it's pretty obvious now that we don't have a ton of research to create really great guidelines, as we saw in the 20 to 25 dietary guidelines for Americans. And part of that is, not every disability and experience with disability will be the same. It can become a challenge to get really solid evidence. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, and push that we have more research studies that are high quality. but it just really emphasizes the importance of listening to our clients. Sometimes they will be an N of one. They were the only research study in their life that has their exact experience. So as professionals, we need to listen to them. And then ourselves, as well as how we communicate with our clients, we need to be open to trial and error. That is not specific to working with people with disabilities in the field of nutrition. There's a lot of trial and error that goes in, but it's a really big part. And as educators, we need to help explain that to our clients, to know that they are the expert in their lived experience, and it may take some trial and error, like Donna mentioned, with restricting dairy, to understand what is actually going on in our own body. There are some kind of major limitations, I guess, when it comes to working with people with disabilities in terms of nutrition. One of the main ones is energy expenditure equations. They have very limited usefulness. What they are is, a lot of research has been done to try and estimate how many calories a person may need just to survive throughout the day. It doesn't quite take into account how active you are, which there are factors that we try to add to that to get closer to the right number. But even working with non-disabled populations, these equations are estimates. They're not usually seen as the gold standard of figuring out someone's energy needs or how many calories they need in that day. And then when you add the layer of disabilities, these equations are far more limited. One, there's less data for us, and also there is a whole spectrum of disabilities and how that can impact someone's calorie needs. So a trial and error a lot of times is what we default back to in our individualized approaches to understanding what a person's baseline calorie needs are. Another example could be, typically when we're learning about nutrition, you learn where different things are absorbed, how the digestion and absorption, kinetics and mechanics work for a quote unquote normal physical body. Nobody has a normal physical body, but when you get into disability, it's not uncommon to have digestion and absorption complications that may arise from different injury levels or different types of physiologies. And so it goes back to trial and error, understanding what a certain person is experiencing and how we can use food and nutrition to maximize their body's abilities. And because of that, oftentimes laboratory markers, so blood results, are even more important in the disabled population than food intake. So a lot of times a dietitian will ask client about what they eat, maybe to try and get an idea of micronutrients they may be lacking in, which is still good, but it doesn't tell us that what they're eating is whether that's actually getting across their small intestine and actually going into their body to be used. So getting laboratory marks is often better indicators of deficiencies in this population, which then goes into more issues when it comes to access to healthcare, access to blood labs that are normally more expensive than a general blood panel. And so that's an unfortunate reality and something that we need to continue to advocate for. And then there's also non-disabled related food choices are just as important. So people with disabilities are still individuals, we're still humans. And the things like access to food, knowledge, abilities, like for cooking abilities, for example, culture, food preferences, all of these are just as important in the disabled community, and are solely for the individual. So it's truly getting to know who you're working with, and then that's got to be your starting point. So you can go to the next slide now. Thank you. And again, like I said, with holisticness, I think we need to really make sure that we are treating the system, not just necessarily treating, but we are picturing a person as a system. And nutrition is part of that. But we have our mind, we have our body, and there are social factors that are involved in our health. And so I think as practitioners working with people with disabilities and with any clients, it's really important for us to be aware of the resources available to our clients that are outside of nutrition even. So things like psychological services and resources that are available, employment services, financial services, and social and community opportunities and services as well. These are integral to a person's overall well-being. And sometimes if someone comes to you to talk about nutrition, it's very possible that these also may be areas that will be very influential in their life. Additionally, when we think of holistic approaches that are related to disabilities, again, we're thinking of a person's overall health and well-being. It's not uncommon for bowel and bladder functions to be impacted by different disabilities. And these is a very common area that can influence what a person with a disability chooses to eat or drink, or chooses not to eat or drink. And as a practitioner, it's really important to understand what a person's going through, how it impacts their actual health and well-being before we give recommendations and while we give recommendations. Another disability-related factor I've experienced with clients is that mobility equipment is costly and it's often very customized. So for example, prosthetics, wheelchairs, braces are often very expensive and custom to their body, which can lead to even more pressures to not change someone's body size. Things that are influencing what they may choose to eat or drink that aren't necessarily related to their nutrition and their health and their overall well-being. So it's really important for us to understand all of the factors that are influencing how a person eats and drinks. And also it could be related to, the abilities to prepare food, the abilities to go out and get food. There are adaptive equipment available that not everyone knows about. And so again, equipping ourselves with the resources available to help empower our clients, have the equipment that they may need in order to be more independent when it comes to food choices and nutrition. That's a really important thing that I've experienced. And when it comes to holistic, I think it's also important to know that physical activity and sleep quality are all as well and integral to our health. And so as a dietitian, as anyone working with someone who's interested in nutrition, knowing what their physical activity is like and what their sleep quality is like should not be neglected in that conversation. And we can go to the next slide. And health. Health is also a very important part of this. And I just think it's so important to remember we're speaking with individuals. They are not just eating machines. They are a mind. They're in a social community. But health is important as well, obviously. And so with regards to nutrition, Rachel made a really good presentation about this. I think, I have an infographic in the upper right corner that's also the My Plate infographic. When it comes to, balanced meals is something that we want to encourage people to do, but which includes, education about quality protein and what those sources are, carbohydrates and what those sources are, what those actual foods are, fats, fruits and vegetables, I really like the point about how the infographic of a plate does not educate people on exactly what those foods are. And that's something that it's important to have resources for people to come to, and whether that's speaking with a dietitian, whether that's actually having access to the internet to go onto the USDA MyPlate and find out the details. But we also try to encourage people to have regular meals. This becomes really important in a lot of different disabilities when maybe portion size can be greatly impacted. And so having smaller meals where we try to get as balanced as we can. So aiming for goals of protein, carbohydrates, colorful things, just all throughout the day can be really helpful. We also want to make sure hydration needs are met. Someone mentioned in the chat about water not being on there. Hydration is something we can't forget, but it's also very individual. A lot of times it comes down to monitoring urine color, thirst, developing some habits like drinking water right when you wake up. It's worth noting that monitoring urine color is a pretty gold standard approach. However, there's a lot of limitations to that as well, especially with different medications that can change the color of urine. So really it's working one-on-one with your clients to help them try and get better and better at knowing what their body needs. And it's also educating them on sources of hydration that aren't just a glass of water. So water, milk, and by milk, I don't just mean dairy, but soy milk as well. Fruit and vegetables also are sources of water. Juices, sports beverages, coffee, and tea are all sources of water that people don't always think about. We also want to encourage fiber most of the time, depending on how a person's GI tract works. Again, this is all very individualized, but fiber can be a very big concern for people with disabilities who have altered GI tracts. So this is, again, individualizing fiber intake to understand how a person feels, what their symptoms are like, but to make sure they get this very important nutrient into their diet. Currently, the recommendation is 14 grams per 1,000 calories. However, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have concrete calorie guidelines for everyone, especially for people with disabilities. So really, I think just explaining to clients what fiber sources are and working with them on how they feel with them in their diet is really the kind of best practice when it comes to encouraging fiber intake. And then micronutrients. So, as I mentioned earlier, having a blood panel list is really I would encourage that if we can, but it's not always available for everyone. And so having a variety of food is just a really best practice. A variety of colors. These can come from canned and frozen foods. They don't have to be fresh fruits and vegetables, but variety is amazing. So seeds, nuts, fatty fish, whole grains, fortified beverages and grains. So dairy products are fortified, orange juice and soy milk are fortified. Just understanding what a variety of options are and what our clients have access to as well, to help get these kind of foundational health needs met through nutrition is a best practice. You can go to the next slide, please. And this is just kind of a summarization I have on this slide, a triangle pyramid type picture. On the top is an infographic of a person with a check mark that says individualization. On the bottom left of my triangle is another infographic that has a person that has holding a weight and holding an apple. And this is the health kind of part of our nutrition presentation. And then on the far right triangle is another sphere and has a person that has kind of meditating pose with a heart and some leaves. And this is the holistic approach. And again, these are kind of the ways I approach nutrition. And I think it can be a best practice for all of us. So thank you. I know we're a little over, so thank you for listening to all of that.
Yeah, that was really great, Susannah. I
you.
put Susanna's email in the chat. I put Donna's email in the chat. I put Kelly's email in the chat because I know we are over time. So if you have questions that you would like to get answered, please feel free to email either one of these people. If you're not sure who the question should go to, you can send it to Kelly and she will make sure it gets to the right person. And we'll make sure we get all of your questions answered. We do have our third course on April 9th from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. EST. And we will be talking about barriers for people with disabilities when it comes to food equity. And that is where we will talk a little bit more about accessible kitchens, adaptive kitchen resources. And we'll also hear from two different perspectives from two young people with a disability, what disordered eating has looked like for them and how that has manifested itself. So we'll kind of hear about this stuff from another perspective in our next session. Our evaluation survey, there's a QR code on this final slide that you can take a picture of or use your camera on your phone or device to answer the survey. The survey's in jot form. I'm also going to put the link in the chat. But as soon as I close out this meeting, it will also show up on your screen. So you'll be able to fill it out then too. So is there any pressing question that somebody needs an answer to before we end today? Okay, and Donna says that she will share her dairy-free chocolate mousse on the Kelly's Kitchen website. So we'll make sure that that gets up there. Thank you everyone for such a great session. I know that we packed a lot in to too short of a time period and we appreciate you sticking with us. So thank you, have a good rest of your day and we will see you for the next course.